On the occasion of our hospital's chief physician, Dr. Robert Sullivan's 55th birthday, our entire staff had gathered together. Out of a team of approximately 150 people, not only medical staff but also relatives known to the chief physician had been invited. One by one, everyone raised their glasses, offering kind words and congratulations to Dr. Sullivan. Then it was my turn. The event host, the chief physician's new assistant, Dr. Victoria Morgan, a woman who considered herself elite, came from a wealthy family and had been working at the hospital for only 3 months, took the microphone and said loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, we also have some of our simplest employees here. One of them is Ms. Linda Harper. She's just a nurse who handles routine tasks. We doctors save lives while she gives injections properly and follows orders. Let's give her the floor." Outwardly attractive but extremely arrogant, this assistant looked down on nurses and openly treated them as inferior. After the doctors, she deliberately gave the first congratulatory speech among the nurses to me. Of course, at Dr. Sullivan's request. After her introduction, a brief silence fell over the hall. Everyone turned their eyes toward me. Some people smiled, but Dr. Robert Sullivan looked uneasy, clearly expecting me to say something unpleasant in response to Dr. Victoria's words. I used the silence and spoke clearly. "Dear Dr. Sullivan, I congratulate you on your birthday. We are grateful that during the 8 years I have worked under your leadership, we have learned simplicity, team values, and respect for everyone, regardless of whether they are a nurse or a doctor. And I believe that everyone who truly sees themselves as part of this team understands this the same way. Of course, those who genuinely consider themselves members of this team..." Suddenly, applause erupted from all sides. Dr. Sullivan stood up and applauded my words. One by one, others followed. Victoria stood up last, clapping awkwardly so as not to stand out. It was obvious that my words had embarrassed her. Seeing the chief physician stand up and accept my congratulations with applause only made her position more uncomfortable. Then the chief physician said, "Linda, you are one of the most valuable employees in our hospital. There have been times when you single-handedly handled tasks that even doctors would normally perform. That's because we have great trust in you. We believe in you." After these words, the applause grew even louder and echoed throughout the hall. A quick glance revealed that the only person unable to share this joy was Victoria, eternally jealous, unable to tolerate the success of others, consumed by envy. That day, the magnificently decorated hall of the Grand Plaza Hotel, designed with refined elegance, once again witnessed our team's joyful dancing and the beautiful words the chief physician spoke about me. The only person who took no share in this beauty was Victoria. While everyone danced and celebrated, she busied herself with her phone, trying to appear extremely occupied. The event came to an end. People began leaving the hall. I picked up my bag and headed toward the exit when suddenly someone grabbed my arm from behind. I turned. It was Victoria. She wore a fake smile, but her eyes were burning. In a low voice, she said, "You were very clever, weren't you? Impressed everyone? Listen, Linda, no matter how hard you work, no matter how much applause you get, you're still just a nurse. I am a doctor. I have a diploma. I have status. You will always follow my orders. Let the chief doctor praise you all he wants. Your place is still below mine. And don't forget, I'm the chief physician's assistant in this hospital. Your career is in my hands. One mistake, and there will be no place for you here." Then she shoved past me and walked away. I said nothing. I simply watched her leave. Inside me, there was no anger, no anxiety, because I knew a person who threatens is a person who is afraid, and Victoria was deeply afraid of my words. From her, anything was possible. I went outside and took a taxi to the hospital. I was on night duty. Coincidentally, Dr. Victoria was also scheduled to be the on-call physician until morning. I had just returned and was sitting in the on-duty nurse's room when less than an hour passed before one of our colleagues who had come back from the banquet was rushed into the emergency department by ambulance. John Myers, a 50-year-old man, head of the hospital laboratory. He was struggling to breathe, choking. His blood pressure had dropped sharply. His heartbeat was irregular. According to his family, he had eaten mussels at the restaurant and had a severe seafood allergy. As we transferred him to the room, the emergency staff called Dr. Victoria Morgan. The moment Victoria entered, she looked at John Myers' face. Now the decision was hers. But Victoria had never faced a critical situation like this before. She panicked. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know what to do. "Yes, doctor, we hear you," I said. "We're waiting for your orders, but hurry. The patient is going into anaphylactic shock. These are signs of a severe allergic reaction. You must intervene immediately." Terrified, Victoria shouted, I've never seen a case like this. Let's wait until another doctor arrives." She began yelling at the staff to urgently contact one of the allergists. There were 2 other nurses in the room besides me. "If we wait for a doctor—" I cut her off and shouted. My voice filled the entire corridor. "It will be too late. The patient could die." Victoria stepped back. Her face had turned ghost white. I took 1 step toward her, pointed my finger at her face, and said firmly, "If you can't handle this situation, step aside. My orders will be followed now." She froze. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were wide. There was no time. I turned to the young nurse beside me and shouted, "Legs up, now!" She immediately raised the patient's legs. I grabbed the epinephrine ampule and snapped it open. My hands were steady. Every movement was precise. I injected it into the patient's arm. "Oxygen!" Another nurse immediately brought the mask. I pressed it onto the patient's face. "IV infusion now!" The line was set. The vein was accessed. The fluid began flowing. Victoria was still standing there, empty-handed, terror on her face. I lifted my head and looked at her. Fire burned in my eyes. "Check the vitals!" She didn't move. "Monitor the pulse." Still frozen. I shouted, "Read the monitor, now! This is an order!" Finally, Victoria snapped out of it and ran to the monitor. Her hands were shaking as she tried to read the numbers. 1 minute passed. The patient's chest was still rising heavily. 2 minutes. Suddenly, his breathing deepened. The choking eased. The monitor beeped. The blood pressure was rising. After the epinephrine injection, I checked the vein in his neck. The pulse was strengthening. "Come on, come on, come on," I whispered. And then, the patient took a deep breath. He opened his eyes. The numbers on the monitor began to return to normal. It was over. Everything was over. I looked around. 3 nurses were standing beside me, supporting me. Victoria was near the monitor, her hand pressed to her mouth, frozen in shock. Beside the patient stood a woman, his wife, Susanna, covering her mouth as she sobbed uncontrollably. I slowly turned toward her. "Everything is okay," I said gently. "Your husband will be fine. He's stable now." Susanna stepped closer to her husband and looked carefully at his face. His eyes were already open. Suddenly, she wrapped her arms around my neck and cried out through her tears. "You saved him! God bless you! You... Her words caught in her throat. I calmly stroked her back. "Please, calm down. Everything is fine now." I checked the patient's pulse again. Normal. His blood pressure had stabilized. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Dr. Richard Chen, an experienced physician, rushed in. He hadn't even had time to change his clothes. He entered, examined the monitors, looked at the patient, checked the IV line, then turned to Victoria. "What happened?" Victoria couldn't answer. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Richard frowned and turned to me. "Linda?" I replied calmly. "Anaphylactic shock. Reaction to seafood. Airway compromise had started. I administered epinephrine, provided oxygen, and initiated IV fluids. He stabilized within 2 minutes." Richard looked back at the patient. He checked the monitor numbers, examined the IV access. Then he turned to me and looked at my face for several seconds. Slowly, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Linda, if you hadn't been here, if you hadn't acted immediately." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He shook his head. "You saved this man's life." Then he turned sharply to Victoria. His voice hardened. "Where were you?" Victoria pressed her lips together but said nothing. Richard continued, "You are a doctor. Why didn't you act in a critical moment like this?" Victoria lowered her head. Richard turned back to me and said quietly but firmly, "Linda, tonight you acted as a doctor. You made the decision. You took responsibility. You saved a life. Never forget that." The next morning at 9 a.m., all department heads, the head nurse, and the core emergency team were summoned to Chief Physician Robert Sullivan's office. The tension in the room was unmistakable. Everyone knew the night's incident would be discussed. Dr. Sullivan sat behind his desk with an open file in front of him. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the room. Last night, a critical incident occurred in our hospital. Our colleague, John Myers, suffered an anaphylactic shock after returning from a banquet. This was a life-threatening situation. He paused briefly and looked directly at Dr. Victoria Morgan. "Dr. Morgan, you were the on-call physician at the time. Explain to me, what happened?" Victoria stood up. Her hands trembled slightly. Her voice was weak at first, then steadied. "Dr. Sullivan, the situation was indeed critical, but we worked as a team. Everyone played their role and—" Dr. Richard Chen stood up. His voice was calm but decisive. "Dr. Sullivan, with your permission, I was a direct witness to last night's events. Allow me to tell the truth." The chief physician nodded. Richard stepped to the center of the room and turned toward Victoria. "No, Victoria, you did not work as a team. You panicked." Victoria's face turned pale. Richard continued, "The patient was suffocating. You couldn't do anything. You were motionless, unresponsive, literally paralyzed. When I arrived and asked you what happened, you couldn't answer. Linda Harper had to order you to even look at the monitor." A deep silence filled the room. Richard raised his voice. "Linda Harper saved a life, alone. She followed protocol perfectly. Epinephrine, oxygen, IV fluids, all within seconds without a single mistake." He looked straight into Victoria's eyes. "Last night, the person you tried to humiliate at the restaurant by calling just a nurse saved a man's life when you were unable to function." Victoria tried to sit down, but her legs failed her. She leaned against the back of a chair. No one in the room moved. Everyone understood how unjust Linda's humiliation at the banquet had been. Chief Physician Robert Sullivan slowly stood up. He looked at me and said, "Linda Harper, please stand." I stood. My heart was pounding. Dr. Sullivan stepped into the center of the room and stopped in front of me. "Linda, what you did is the highest example of professionalism. You taught all of us, doctors, department heads, everyone, a lesson." He turned to the room. "It is not titles that save lives, but skill and composure. Not diplomas, but conscience and experience make the difference." Then he looked at me again. "Linda, I owe you an apology. Yesterday, you were not shown the respect you deserved. Your work was belittled, and I allowed that to happen." He bowed his head. Footsteps echoed through the room. A few people stood up and began to applaud. Then others joined in. The chief physician raised his hand, asking for silence. He turned toward Victoria. There was no warmth left on his face. "Dr. Morgan." Victoria stood up on unsteady legs. "Your behavior is unacceptable. 2 days ago, you publicly humiliated a colleague. You called her a simple employee. You diminished the value of her work." He took a step forward. "And then, in a critical moment, you demonstrated your incompetence. You've been working here for 3 months. Yet you still fail to understand the most fundamental truth. In a hospital, status does not save lives. Knowledge does. Victoria's lips trembled. You do not represent this hospital's values. Therefore, effective immediately, you are removed from the position of chief physician's assistant. Victoria tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. You will be given 2 weeks to await a new position offer. Otherwise, your employment contract will be terminated. Dr. Sullivan added firmly, if during this period any hostility, pressure, or humiliation toward another employee is observed in any form, your contract will be terminated immediately. Is that clear? Victoria nodded. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she did not cry. You may leave. Victoria walked toward the door. No one looked at her. When the door closed behind her, Dr. Sullivan turned to me once more. Linda, thank you. You are a source of pride for this hospital. The chief physician took his seat. The meeting was over. People slowly began leaving the room, but something had changed. Eyes that hadn't noticed me yesterday now looked at me with respect. Some nodded in greeting, others whispered, "Well done." I simply smiled. As I reached the door, Dr. Sullivan called out one last time, "Linda, I want to see you like this, not just today, but every day." I stepped into the corridor. The familiar sounds of the hospital surrounded me. The creak of a rolling stretcher, the soft beeping of monitors, a nurse's call echoing from a distance. Everything was in its place. Life was going on. So was my work. I straightened my uniform and walked toward the next patient room, because names, titles, and positions were never what mattered to me. I knew only one thing. If you can touch a human life, that is already enough. And I was exactly where I belonged.